Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm Jonathan Schechter. I run the Chartour Institute, and I am thrilled to welcome you to the 8th annual 22 and 21. I want to start with a few thank yous. First and foremost, St. John's Medical Center, Paul and Karen, this is your 6th consecutive year of sponsoring us, so thank you so very much, and John. And Spring Creek Ranch, as always, has just been a dream to work with. So Steve Price, who's not here because his wife Lisa's father is turning 90, so they're there to celebrate that birthday. Chase Wharton, who's their head of events, he became a father on Friday, so he's got a higher calling. And Kyler Lancaster, who's been helping me out. And to Spring Creek, from a logistical perspective, just to give you a heads up, at lunchtime, in past years we've been able to set up 2 buffets, but for logistical reasons we haven't been able to. So to try and expedite things, when we get to lunch we'll be doing it in waves of 5 tables at a time, just to try and keep that from getting too clustered up there. So Olivia, who is the Spring Creek Events Manager, will be the food czar and telling you exactly when you can go get your food. I'd like to, and also on a logistical note, would you please be sure to drop your name tag off at the end there down on the table where you picked it up? That would be great. I'd like to thank my board and our 18 speakers. I mean, this is an extraordinary turnout of leadership from around our region, and I'm so very grateful to not just the 18 speakers, but to the 3 moderators for our panels. It's going to be a really great day with some of the best minds and leadership in our community, and Andy Schwartz is doubling as both a moderator and a panelist, so he's take pity on him because he's really got a big job. I would like to start with a couple of opening remarks to set the tone, and what I asked you with your homework, and some of you probably did it and others may not have, but there are really 2 questions that are shaping today's event, and after I'm done talking, we will sit in groups and talk about these questions within our tables, just to sort of prime the pump for the conversations that will come later. But from your perspective, what's the most important thing to know about our region? And then what is one action we could take, whether individually or collectively, to really make our future better? And so if I'm going to ask you to talk about that stuff, then I figured I'd better pony up and start myself. And I'd like to start with the immodestly named Schechter's Maxim. And in its abbreviated version, it's that economies change faster than perceptions, and perceptions change faster than politics. An example of that would be Facebook, which got started under 13 years ago and today has a market capitalization of over $500 billion. So that changed, and things have changed pretty quickly. But from a perceptions perspective, it was considered to be the cool kid on the block, and it grew very, very rapidly. And then the election of 2016 came along. And so perceptions have started to change about this company, which still is over $500 billion, but usage is down 10% in just the last 2 years. And so they're struggling. But what's really important, I think, in all this is the politics aspect, that we recognize that there's issues now with social media, which has just exploded. So whether it's Facebook or Instagram or any of the social media out there, but people really aren't quite sure how to deal with it at a regulatory level, or even if it should be dealt with at all. So again, economies change faster than perceptions, and perceptions change faster than politics. And there's a full-blown version of Schechter's Maxim, which starts with basic science. Basic research leads to technology. The technology leads to the economy. The economy leads to perceptions. Those change faster than politics, which change faster than laws. And ultimately, legislation changes faster than jurisprudence. So why mention all that? Well, let's consider the state of Wyoming. In particular, how we raise funding for our local and state government. There are basically 3 pillars of Wyoming's governmental revenues. There's the sales tax. Sometime in the 1920s, I'm not sure on the exact date, the state of Wyoming implemented a 1-cent sales tax, 1% sales tax. But by the 1970s, early 1970s, that wasn't working for us. So in the early 1970s, we started with a mineral severance tax. And then we have investments, and those are essentially the three pillars of how Wyoming funds state government. Why do we do it that way? Well, a general rule of thumb is you tax what you have. And what we had up until the 1970s was going to the store, and we could have a sales tax. But then things changed a little bit. And so we started taxing severance minerals. How's that working for us? Well, in the most recent biennium, minerals between severance tax and federal mining and sales and use related to minerals and investments related to minerals accounted for 61% of the state's entire revenues. And if you add in sales tax, again, that 1%, which is now 4%, and investments, it accounts for 84%, so $5 out of every 6 that the state takes in. And that has treated our state extraordinarily well. The typical Wyoming family of 3 people in 2017 paid about $3,000 in taxes between alcohol, cigarettes, gasoline, vehicles, retail, property tax, and you got about $27,000 worth of services. And that gap was made up by minerals, by that 3-part leg of minerals. So, but the question is, what's happened to our state during the last 50 years? This way of funding government has been in place for 50 years, but is the state really the same place? Well, you can get good data going back to 1969, so 50 years ago. And between 1969 and 2017, the state's population grew 76%, which was actually faster than that of the nation. It was slower than the region, though, and of particular interest to those of us in the room, it was much, much slower than Teton County's. Teton County's population growth over the last 50 years has been about 5-fold. And it's by far the fastest growing of any of Wyoming's counties. In fact, a couple of Wyoming's counties have lost population since 1969. But what it's allowed us to do is grow from 20th out of the 23 counties in number of people in 1969 to our current 9th place. And of course, as those who live down the canyon or over the hill know, it's also creating ripple effects that are rippling out. Teton County, Idaho is actually growing faster than Teton County, Wyoming. How about jobs? Well, it was interesting because in 1969, the job mix in the US and Wyoming was pretty similar, but that doesn't include agriculture and mining. And in 1969, roughly 20% of our jobs were tied up with agriculture and mining, and it's shrunk today. So it's a very different thing. So the number of agriculture and mining jobs in our state has shrunk by about 1/3 over the last 50 years. And what's really changed is the mix here in Teton County. Overall in the United States, in Wyoming, and particularly in Teton County, where it's incredibly service dependent. And this has been a pretty big shift over the last 50 years. What about personal income? Well, in 1969, the US and Wyoming were very similar in our income mix between wages, investments, and pensions. But today it's a little bit different. Wyoming has a much bigger share of investment income than the United States. And the question is why? And the answer is Teton County. Teton County alone accounts for 40% of all of Wyoming's investment income. 72% of all of our income is from investments. It's by far the highest in the nation. And if you take that out, we as a state are basically the same in our income mix as the rest of the nation. You tax what you have, and if you look at personal income as a proxy for that sector, in 1969, about 25% of all of Wyoming's income was earned from wages in retail, lodging, dining, mining, agriculture. And today it's much smaller. It's shrunk by about 1/3 in the state, and it's shrunk by about 70% here in Teton County. So why does this matter? Well, if there's misalignment, then you got a problem. And one of the more interesting things that came out of this piece of research for me is this, that in 2019, the amount of coal that will be mined in the United States as a whole is about the same as in 1969. 50 years later, we haven't changed in the amount of coal that the country is producing. It's obviously peaked, and it's come down very, very rapidly. And in fact, in 2019, it's almost certain that the total amount of energy, electricity generated from renewable energy, combination of hydro, biomass, solar, and wind, will exceed coal for the first time. What happens if all your eggs are in one basket, as they are for us as a state? Well, if you go back 2 biennia to 2013-14, fully 71% or 70% of the state's income was off of minerals. But because the state's, because mineral revenue, in particular coal, has dropped so very rapidly, it's down to 64% today. But here's the key thing. It's not just Wyoming that's put all its eggs in one basket. If you look at the town of Jackson revenues, which I've taken on a much more intense interest in the last few months, 72% of our projected revenues for this coming year are going to come from sales tax. We are more dependent as a town of Jackson on sales tax revenue than the state of Wyoming is on minerals. So a lot has changed in 50 years. One thing that hasn't changed is the amount of coal that's being produced in the United States. But we have nearly 5 times more people here in Teton County than we did 50 years ago. We have a much different demographic. Government is being asked to do more, and it's being expected to do more. And critically, government is a service industry. Like so much of tourism, it isn't as susceptible to massive increases in efficiency from technology because ultimately it's a people game. So again, yet we're still funding government the same way as we did 50 years ago. And we're benefiting wildly. And the question fundamentally is that gap going to still continue to be filled by minerals? And if it's not, then what does that mean for us? So then I would ask you to think about our region's issues: transportation, housing, growing income inequality, and the things like that. The fundamental question, and it's the one that is facing pretty much everybody you'll be hearing from today, is how do we go about thinking about the role government should play? And are we funding it appropriately? Do we have the mechanisms in place to fund government appropriately for the services that we are asking it to provide? And if you boil all that down to one fundamental question, what is 21st century government? And how well aligned is that with the way that our economy works and the way that we ask to fund, or the way we try to fund our government? So Wyoming's economy has clearly changed much faster than our perceptions. And the question is the politics. And the alignment there is really the fundamental question that we're going to be trying to explore today. So the other question that I asked was, what's one thing we can do about it? So one thing that I'd like to see is that we have so much talent in this community. We have so many people who are bright in captains of industry or finance or what have you. I would really love to see us as a community put together some sort of blue ribbon commission and pull together some of the best minds in our community to start asking these questions, because I think they're really, really important to our future, to try and ask ourselves, what are we really expecting to provide, and do we have the resources to do that? And if not, what is it that we can be doing, taking a step as a community? So that's my answer to the question of what's really important and what's something we might do. But before we do that, there's one other thought I'd like to share with you, and this is something, there's an essay that I wrote on your table. And a new initiative that my organization, the Chartour Institute, is going to be undertaking now is something we're calling co-thriving. And I think it's really the critical challenge facing our generation of people on the planet. We as humans have really done very well in the last 250 years since the Industrial Revolution started. Our life expectancy has doubled. Our population on Earth has increased tenfold. But the question is, how well is the environment doing? And I don't think it's doing very well. And the recent United Nations report that came out that said 1/8 of all the species on Earth are at risk of extinction kind of points to that. And the remarkable thing, though, and I think it's unique on the planet, and unique in the last 250 years, is that we have a healthy environment and a healthy economy, a healthy human community here in this region. And that's extraordinary, and we can be a model for the world. And so that's something that this idea of what can we do, how are we doing it, and can we keep it going, that's what we're going to be focusing on as an organization going forward. It's an opportunity. We stand on the shoulders of some giants in the conservation world, and it's our opportunity to leave a legacy. So, those are my thoughts. Welcome. As far as the next steps, what's really important here is what's the collective thinking in the room. So all of those of you who are standing, would you please find a table? And what I would like you to do is, as a group, spend about 45 minutes and talk about the homework assignment. If you wrote it down, then you've got it in front of you. If you haven't written it down, would you please do so? Because at the end of this session, what we would like to do is collect all these sheets and tally it. What are the most important things that you guys collectively think are coming down the road, and what are steps that we can take? We'll tally that up, we'll distribute it back to you, and let you know what you're thinking collectively. So if you would take the 3 steps, go around and answer the questions, find somebody in your table who can report out in about 45 minutes. And again, please write them down, and please be sure to leave it on the table, and we'll come around and collect it later, so that we can get a collective sense of it. And after we do that, we'll do reports out where we'll quickly go around and hear what you each have to say. So it's about 9:20 now, and so we'll go to about 10 o'clock, and then we'll start our report out. So thank you again for coming. It's going to be a great day, and thank you for listening.